American soldiers never knew. Their own military was hiding the truth, hiding something that terrified even the most hardened men on the battlefield. During the chaos of World War II, reports began to surface, whispers of strange figures drifting through the smoke of destroyed cities, silent silhouettes walking across bombed-out fields, vanishing when approached. At first, soldiers thought it was exhaustion, shell shock, or just the fog of war playing tricks on their minds. But then, the sightings became too frequent, too detailed, and too eerily similar to ignore. Men stationed in Europe, the Pacific, even remote desert bases, all described the same thing: apparitions that looked human, but weren't, and when they reported it, their superiors told them to stay quiet. Files disappeared, witnesses were reassigned, and official records sealed for decades. What were these soldiers really seeing? Were they hallucinations born of trauma, or something much darker, hidden behind classified walls? Tonight, we uncovered the secret reports, declassified documents, and chilling testimonies that suggest the US military may have known, and may still be hiding the truth, because in war, not every enemy carries a gun. Now, let's begin the story. France, 1944. The night was thick with smoke and silence. The guns had gone quiet hours ago, leaving behind a strange emptiness and uneasy calm that always came before dawn. Private Henry Walker sat near the ruins of a farmhouse outside St. Lay, staring into the flickering remains of a fire. His unit had lost 6 men that day, and nobody spoke much anymore. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw something move. A figure, standing just beyond the light, motionless, watching. He called out, thinking it was another soldier returning from patrol, but the figure didn't answer. It stepped forward, slow, soundless, and as the moonlight broke through the smoke, Henry saw it wasn't a man at all. The shape shimmered faintly, like heat rising from metal, before fading into nothing. The next morning, Henry told his sergeant. The response was simple: keep it to yourself. That night, 3 more soldiers saw the same thing. They all kept quiet. These encounters spread like rumors. Across units, whispers of ghost patrols that walked the fields at night, faces of fallen comrades appearing for a moment and then dissolving into mist. Some men said they heard voices calling their names through the fog. Others swore they saw soldiers walking straight through walls. By the winter of '44, similar reports came in from Italy, the Ardennes, and even the Pacific, places where death had come suddenly, violently, and stayed. In New Guinea, Marines spoke of glowing figures near crash sites. In Okinawa, sentries fired at moving shadows that left no footprints. At first, military command dismissed these as exhaustion or battle stress, but the descriptions were too consistent. The same phrases appeared in field notes and diaries from men who had never met each other. Transparent forms, cold air around them, voices from the trenches. And then something strange happened. Reports stopped being written down. Files vanished from regional offices. Soldiers were quietly transferred. In one known case, a chaplain who'd gathered testimonies from his men was ordered to destroy them. His personal journal, recovered decades later, contained a single haunting line: they fear the truth more than the enemy. But not everyone stayed silent. Corporal James Rourke of the 29th Infantry kept a hidden notebook, recording every encounter. He described seeing a column of light move across a destroyed bridge in Normandy, illuminating corpses that hadn't been found yet. He also noted something chilling every time the apparition appeared. An unexploded shell nearby would detonate minutes later, as if drawn to its presence. Years later, Rourke's daughter found his notebook among his effects. She turned it over to a historian, who noticed the coordinates matched official records of spontaneous detonations, records that had been classified. Coincidence? Maybe, but when veterans from different divisions told eerily similar stories, men who'd fought thousands of miles apart became harder to explain away. One account came from the jungles of the Philippines. A patrol stumbled upon what looked like an entire platoon moving through the trees. American uniforms, helmets glinting faintly in the moonlight. But when the patrol followed them into a clearing, there was nothing, just silence. Not a footprint, not a broken branch. The soldiers radioed it in. Hours later, intelligence officers arrived, confiscated the radio logs, and told them they saw nothing. By war's end, hundreds of stories like this existed, none official, but all eerily consistent, and yet, something darker lurked beneath these sightings. Some soldiers claimed the figures weren't just watching, they were warning, One veteran from the Battle of the Bulge recalled hearing the words, "Get down," whispered just before an artillery shell hit his camp. He survived. Everyone else didn't. Was it guilt, hallucination, or something else entirely? When the war ended, most men tried to forget, but the reports didn't stop. They followed the soldiers home into their dreams, their memories, even their new assignments. Strange occurrences at bases, flickering lights in empty barracks, and shadows moving through sealed rooms. Then, in 1947, something unexpected surfaced. An internal memo from the U.S. Army's Psychological Warfare Division referenced unexplained visual phenomena observed under combat stress. The document classified these as Type G anomalies. G, the memo noted, stood for ghost. That memo was never meant for public eyes, but it hinted at something larger, an organized attempt to catalog these sightings, not dismiss them. So why hide it? Why erase the reports, silence witnesses, and bury the evidence under layers of secrecy? Some historians believe it wasn't fear of ridicule but fear of exposure, because among those secret files was a note suggesting that certain sightings correlated with areas where experimental weapons were being tested, electromagnetic pulses, radar jamming, and light-based deception systems that could, theoretically, cause visual distortions. Could it be that the soldiers weren't seeing spirits, but the side effects of secret technology? That explanation would make sense if, not for one problem. Reports of the same apparitions appeared in German and Japanese diaries too. Opposite sides, same descriptions, figures walking in light, whispering in English, soldiers appearing from nowhere. How could both sides be seeing the same thing? By the time the US military began investigating, something else was happening. Files marked Spectre Division started circulating between intelligence offices. Their purpose, still classified, but a handful of declassified cables reference field anomalies in high casualty zones and containment of morale threats. Containment, not study, which meant someone believed these sightings could spread like fear or disease. Years later, a veteran named Tom Bradley recalled one night in the forests near Bass. His platoon was pinned down by shellfire when he saw a man walking calmly through the explosions, untouched. The man turned, looked directly at him, and vanished. The next morning, Bradley described the man to his commander. The commander went pale. The description matched a soldier who'd died 2 days earlier. And here's where everything shifts. After the war, researchers connected to the newly formed CIA began reviewing these ghost files. A former Army intelligence officer claimed that a small branch within military intelligence began testing ways to replicate the phenomenon Project Spectre. Their goal wasn't to understand it, it was to use it, because if soldiers could be made to see things that weren't there, entire battles could be influenced without firing a shot. The truth, or what's left of it, suggests that the ghosts of World War II might not have been ghosts at all, but the first glimpse of something far more controlled, something that required silence, because if men believed they were seeing the dead return to warn them, imagine what else they might believe if someone wanted them to. And as rumors of these specters spread through the ranks, the military's message was clear. You didn't see anything, you didn't hear anything, and you definitely didn't talk about it. But buried inside the chaos of war, one photograph survived, taken by a combat cameraman outside Aachen. It showed what looked like a man made of smoke standing behind a squad of soldiers. The negative was confiscated. The cameraman was reassigned. Decades later, that image leaked. Analysts confirmed the photo was untouched. So if it wasn't altered, then what did that camera really capture? As the war ended and America stepped into the atomic age, Project Spectre vanished, swallowed by secrecy. The men who'd seen the impossible went home with stories no one wanted to believe, but some of them still wrote, still remembered, and still swore that what they saw wasn't human. And that brings us to the next chapter, where the silence became official, and those who spoke out began to disappear, because when ghosts haunt soldiers, it's terrifying. But when the military starts haunting the truth, it becomes something else entirely. Orders from above, silence to witnesses. The war had ended, but the silence had only just begun. By 1946, soldiers who'd returned home from Europe began talking quietly, cautiously about what they'd seen. In bars, in veterans' halls, in letters written late at night when the house was asleep. They told stories of men walking through fog who were already dead, of whispers in the trenches that seemed to come from nowhere. Some wrote to newspapers, others to military offices, seeking an explanation. None received a reply. Then, one by one, Those who spoke too loudly stopped speaking altogether. Captain William Hargrove was one of them, a decorated officer who'd served in the Ardennes. He'd witnessed what he called light forms moving across no man's land during a lull in battle. He was interviewed twice by Army intelligence. Days later, he was found dead in his study, his service pistol beside him. The note he left behind was strange. It didn't read like a suicide letter. "They told me I saw what I needed to see," it said, "but I know what I saw." His wife, who later gave the letter to a journalist, claimed 2 men in plain clothes arrived at her home the next morning. They took every one of Hargrove's notebooks, his photographs, even his typewriter ribbon. The army called it a security measure. She called it something else. -erasure. Across the country, similar stories emerged. Veterans' testimonies were dismissed as hysteria or post-traumatic stress. Doctors were instructed to record hallucination symptoms without noting the specific content of the visions. But one internal memo, later leaked, revealed an unsettling directive from High Command: refrain from documenting incidents related to Type G phenomena. Defer to Central Intelligence Authority. Central Intelligence, that was new. For the men who'd fought in Europe, that phrase meant one thing: someone higher than the army had taken an interest, and not to find the truth but to bury it. The silence wasn't just a policy, it was an operation. In 1948, a small, unmarked office inside the Pentagon began collecting testimonies labeled anomalous experience reports. Witnesses were interviewed under oath, sworn to secrecy, and often transferred or discharged shortly after. Records of these sessions were logged under innocuous project names: Eclipse, Mirage, each one deniable, each one quietly growing. Then came the disappearances, not of people, but of evidence. Film reels from war correspondence, showing strange distortions in the background of night footage, were destroyed. Audio recordings of soldiers describing phantom voices were marked inaudible and sealed. Even official war diaries, government property, were rewritten before being archived. The entries that once described glowing figures in bombed villages now read simply "enemy movement unconfirmed." And yet, one man managed to keep his records. Lieutenant Frank Delaney, an intelligence officer stationed in Bavaria, had been tasked with investigating psychological contagion among American troops after multiple reports of ghost patrols. What he found shocked him. Several of the witnesses described the same details: a faint electrical hum, sudden drops in temperature, and a strange smell like ozone just before the apparitions appeared. Delaney compiled over 70 pages of notes, complete with sketches and diagrams. When he submitted his report to his superior, it vanished. Weeks later, he received new orders: report to Washington for reassignment. But before leaving, he hid a carbon copy of his notes behind a loose wall panel in the barracks. Those notes were discovered 40 years later, during a demolition. The findings were clear. Delaney believed the military knew more than it admitted. His report concluded that localized electromagnetic fields of unnatural intensity might explain the manifestations, but he also speculated that someone had deliberately created them. If he was right, that meant the haunting wasn't accidental. It was engineered. The years after the war only deepened the mystery. By the early 1950s, Cold War paranoia gave the military the perfect excuse to hide anything unusual behind the curtain of national security. Project Spectre was officially shut down, its files absorbed into other departments. But strange new designations appeared in internal memos: psychotronic research, perceptual influence testing, ghostlight experiments. One surviving veteran from that era, Sergeant Daniel Cross, gave a chilling account in 1971. He claimed he'd been part of a containment exercise at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. His squad was ordered to patrol an empty section of forest where radar had picked up unknown heat signatures. For 3 nights, they saw faint silhouettes moving through the trees, humanoid, silent, glowing faintly green. They fired flares, but the lights didn't react. When they advanced, the shapes vanished. When the squad returned, their commanding officer confiscated all gear, including their dog tags. They were told the mission never occurred. Cross said his discharge papers listed a false unit number. To this day, no records exist of that operation. Some researchers believe these cover-ups weren't just to hide strange sightings, but to protect something darker. A handful of declassified letters between military engineers mention optic interference devices being field-tested in Europe as early as 1944. Devices meant to bend light, distort heat signatures, and project false images. If true, those ghosts might have been prototypes of an invisible weapon one the government never wanted its soldiers to know about. But there's a flaw in that theory. Some sightings occurred in places where no such experiments could have taken place: remote villages, mountain passes, small island outposts. And the witnesses weren't just Americans. German, Soviet, and Japanese soldiers described the same phenomena, using nearly identical words. So if the US government was behind it, how did the enemy see it too? That question haunted the few investigators who dared to dig deeper. One of them, a researcher named Evelyn Carver, filed a Freedom of Information request in 1982, seeking access to wartime psychological operations files. Within weeks, she began receiving phone calls late at night, no voice on the other end, just a low static hum. Her request was denied for reasons of national defense. She later vanished while traveling to meet a source who claimed to have worked on Project Spectre. Her car was found abandoned at a rest stop in Virginia. The only thing missing was her briefcase. Whatever she knew, someone didn't want it revealed. By now, the pattern was unmistakable. Every attempt to uncover the truth ended in silence, careers destroyed, evidence erased, witnesses dismissed as unstable. And yet, every once in a while, something slipped through. A photograph, a diary, a memo that shouldn't have survived. Each one telling the same story in different words. They saw something, it wasn't supposed to exist, and someone made sure we'd never know why. As the Cold War deepened, the government's obsession with secrecy reached new heights. UFO sightings, psychic experiments, ghost stories all blurred together under the umbrella of classified phenomena. Reporters who asked the wrong questions found themselves blacklisted. And for decades, the truth remained buried beneath bureaucracy, sealed behind words like confidential and top secret. But time has a way of loosening even the tightest vaults. In the mid-1990s, a small batch of declassified documents surfaced through an archival error. Among them was a partial transcript labeled Spectre 03. It described an incident involving unknown luminous entities at a munitions depot in 1945 and the subsequent order to suppress all witness accounts under penalty of treason. The document ended abruptly, as if someone had cut the tape. What came after that redacted line remains unknown, but the last words on the page still send chills to anyone who reads them. Containment protocol authorized, witnesses compromised, truth unfit for civilian release. Whatever those witnesses saw, the government decided it was safer for the world not to know. Yet some say, if you listen closely during military night exercises, you can still hear faint voices carried on the wind, men calling out for help from battles that ended long ago. And as strange, new sightings begin to appear in modern training zones, eerily similar to those from World War II. One question refuses to die: what if the ghosts never left, because they were never dead to begin with? Next, we uncover the secret that tied them all together, the creation of a program that officially never existed, known only by its codename, Project Spectre. The classified files, Project Spectre. For years, Project Spectre was nothing more than a whisperer name without a file, a rumor without a face. But in 1952, buried deep within a forgotten wing of the newly formed Defense Intelligence Agency, something began to take shape. The records, what little exists, suggest it started as an experiment in perception. The official purpose, to study anomalous battlefield phenomena and their potential influence on troop behavior. The unofficial one, to weaponize fear. It began with an intercepted German document found in a bunker outside Berlin. It described experiments involving light refraction and electromagnetic pulses designed to create illusions on the battlefield phantoms. They called them. The Nazis believed they could project human forms through vapor and smoke, tricking Allied soldiers into firing at shadows. Most dismissed it as nonsense, but someone in Washington didn't. That file reached a man named Colonel Nathan Kells, a brilliant strategist with a fascination for the occult. He proposed reviving the German research, only this time with American technology. He called it Project Spectre. The idea was simple. If the human mind could be manipulated to see ghosts, then ghosts could be used as a weapon. The experiments began in the Nevada desert under the guise of radar testing. Witnesses spoke of strange shimmering figures appearing during nighttime drills, too human to be tricks of light, too silent to be living. Soldiers stationed there began complaining of headaches, dizziness, and hallucinations. One even claimed to see his dead brother standing beside him in full uniform, saluting. Within weeks, he was transferred. His medical file, sealed. Officially, the military attributed the phenomena to heat mirages and light anomalies, but internal reports told another story: machines that emitted low-frequency fields, capable of interfering with the brain's visual cortex. The devices were called projectors. The engineers who designed them didn't realize what they'd unleashed until the first test went wrong. In 1953, during a night exercise known as Operation Haze, the generators overloaded. A blinding surge of energy lit up the desert sky, and when it cleared, 2 soldiers were missing. Search teams found their rifles, their helmets, even their boot prints, but no bodies. Witnesses swore they saw figures walking through the sand, that night, figures glowing faintly, drifting against the wind. Command immediately locked down the site. All reports were classified under National Defense Research. The project's lead scientist, Dr. Adrian Cole, resigned the following month. In a letter to his wife, later recovered from an archive, he wrote, "We tried to make men see ghosts. Now, I think we've made ghosts see us." But the military didn't stop. Project Spectre moved under. The research was relocated to a facility in Maryland, disguised as a psychological research lab. Dozens of test subjects were brought in, told they were participating in combat readiness simulations. What they experienced, however, defied reason. Rooms that grew cold without warning, faces appearing in reflective glass, voices whispering from nowhere. By 1956, the team discovered that under specific electromagnetic conditions, the human mind could be tricked into perceiving motion where none existed. They also discovered that some of the figures recorded by their cameras didn't vanish when the power was cut. They stayed. The photographs were analyzed frame by frame. Human shapes, blurred, translucent, stood where no one had been. Some matched the test subjects themselves, as if their images had been torn from the present and reassembled in another layer of reality. Others were unrecognizable. That's when the panic began. Several scientists reported nightmares, hearing footsteps in empty corridors, or seeing their own reflections blink. The facility was shut down for maintenance, but insiders knew better. The project had crossed into something it couldn't control. And yet, months later, the experiments resumed, this time under the CIA's oversight. The Cold War had turned paranoia into a science. If America didn't harness these psychophysical effects, the Soviets would. Project Spectre's new objective shifted: study how to use the phenomenon to influence enemy morale, to sow confusion and fear. Field tests were rumored in Korea: brief, deniable, and terrifying. Soldiers on both sides reported apparitions moving across minefields at night. Propaganda? Possibly, but one declassified transmission from the era reads, "Entities visible to all optical devices. No physical confirmation, proceeding with blackout protocol. Entities visible to all optical devices, but not physically there." It was no longer a hallucination problem. Something had been created that even machines could see. And then, Project Spectre vanished again, absorbed into deeper layers of secrecy. Funding shifted through shell departments and research divisions that didn't exist on paper. The scientists who remained were given new identities. Those who quit simply disappeared. One, a physicist named Dr. Cole, the same man who had once warned his wife, was found dead in his home in 1961. The police report cited carbon monoxide poisoning, but his neighbors reported strange electrical surges the night before his death. And all the clocks in his house had stopped at 3:17 a.m. that same year. A classified memo from the Office of Naval Research mentioned field persistence, anomalies in former Spectre testing zones. The memo concluded that these anomalies may represent non-reversible atmospheric imprints. In other words, impressions of people, events, or energy that refused to fade. It was as if the ghosts the military tried to manufacture had become real. Even decades later, soldiers stationed near old testing sites reported strange lights, cold zones, and human-shaped figures caught on night vision. The official response was always the same: malfunctioning equipment. But some insiders whispered that Project Spectre hadn't failed at all, it had succeeded beyond its control. By the late 1960s, new versions of the project appeared under different names: Project Echo, Project Mirage, each promising breakthroughs in field deception technology. Yet every experiment ended the same way: unexplainable figures, terrified witnesses, and orders from above to destroy the evidence. A former technician from the Maryland facility later admitted in an interview, "We thought we were bending light, but it felt more like we were opening doors. Doors to where? No one could say." In one recovered recording, its authenticity never confirmed, a trembling voice is heard saying, "They're not projections, they're remembering us." The tape ends abruptly with static. Some historians believe the so-called ghost sightings that soldiers reported weren't hauntings at all. They were after images of these early experiments, shadows of men and moments burned into the fabric of the battlefield itself. Others claim something crossed back through those fields of energy, something that was never meant to. Whatever the truth, the files that remain are incomplete, redacted, and riddled with contradictions. But one note stands out among them, written in red ink across the final Spectre report: "Shut it down. They've started appearing where no devices are present." It was the last entry before the project disappeared forever, or so they say, because years later, soldiers in Vietnam began reporting the same thing: figures walking through jungle mist, silent, luminous, familiar, the same type of haunting the army had tried to hide decades before. But this time, those who witnessed it swore the apparitions weren't just watching, they were searching. And as we move deeper into this mystery, the question grows more chilling. If Project Spectre ended, why are the sightings still happening? What if the ghosts the military created never stopped coming back? Echoes of the dead. The jungle was alive with crickets, the hum of insects, and the faint murmur of men trying not to breathe too loudly. It was Vietnam, 1969. Private Raymond Harris crouched behind a fallen log, waiting for dawn. His unit had been ambushed 2 nights in a row. Exhaustion clung to them like sweat. But that night, something new crept in, a sound that didn't belong. A voice. It came softly through the trees. A man's voice, low, strained, whispering in perfect English. "Harris, get down." Ray froze. The voice was familiar. It was Corporal Dunn, his best friend killed 2 weeks earlier in an explosion. The next second, a burst of enemy fire ripped through the clearing. Harris hit the ground instinctively. When the gunfire stopped, he was alive. His commander wasn't. He told no one. But later, around the campfire, another soldier leaned close and said, "I heard him too." By the late stages of Vietnam, the whispers had returned, ghosts on the battlefield, soldiers seeing faces of the dead guiding them, warning them, haunting them. Only now, it wasn't rumor. It was documented, in secret. Military intelligence reports from 1968 to 1971 mention acoustic phenomena of unknown origin, psychological visual distortions, and, most cryptically, type S field interference. Type S Spectre. The ghosts were beckoned. Someone in the Pentagon was tracking every sighting. The official explanation blamed stress, tropical fever, or enemy propaganda. But deep inside classified archives, a series of reports tell a different story. Soldiers described seeing glowing figures that seemed to move against the wind. Thermal cameras captured human shapes with no body heat. Entire platoons reported hearing phantom radio transmissions from voices of men who'd died days earlier. None of it made sense. You remembered Project Spectre. Buried in those files was an addendum marked Phase 2 Remote Application Trials. It suggested that parts of the old technology, the field projectors, the electromagnetic emitters, had been repurposed in Vietnam for psychological operations. But something had gone wrong. Units that used the devices began experiencing hallucinations long after the machines were switched off. A technician named Paul Grant wrote in his diary that the projectors aren't projecting anymore. They're replaying. Replay. That word appeared again and again. Some scientists started to believe that Project Spectre hadn't just created illusions, it had recorded something. The energy fields used in the experiments might have imprinted the atmosphere itself, leaving behind echoes of moments, voices, even consciousness. They called them field residues. Others called them souls trapped between dimensions of memory and matter. Whatever they were, they didn't fade. By the 1970s, bases from Vietnam to Guam reported the same strange phenomena. Storage rooms freezing over, equipment turning on by itself, shadows walking across walls long after everyone had gone. It was as if the ghosts had learned to live in the circuits, in the static. Then, in 1974, a helicopter crew in Cambodia captured something extraordinary on night vision. A line of faint figures marching in perfect formation along an abandoned road, uniforms barely visible, their outlines pulsing with light. The pilot circled back. Nothing was there. But when the footage was analyzed, the figures appeared again, faint but undeniable. Experts confirmed it wasn't a camera error. That footage vanished within 48 hours. The Pentagon denied its existence. Yet several technicians who saw it firsthand claimed the figures matched the silhouettes of an American squad missing in that very region 2 years prior. It was as if the battlefield itself was replaying its dead dot. As the sightings spread, command grew desperate to contain them. Internal memos warned of morale instability due to spectral incidents. Soldiers who spoke openly were sent for psychiatric evaluation. But privately, some officers began to question if these weren't hauntings at all, if the ghosts weren't memories of the dead, but messages from the living. That theory emerged when a unit intercepted what they thought was enemy radio chatter. The transmission repeated one word, Spectre. Analysts matched the signal pattern to one used by American prototypes in the 1950s technology that was supposedly destroyed decades earlier. How could a dead program transmit? From the jungles of Vietnam, the investigation pointed to a secret outpost, a research detachment known only as Unit 731B, hidden deep within the Central Highlands. It operated under humanitarian cover, but satellite images taken years later revealed antennas, massive generators, and a series of underground bunkers, eerily similar to the design of Spectre's original Nevada site. Unit 731B was dismantled in 1975, its personnel quietly reassigned or declared missing, but locals near the site told stories of nights when the forest glowed pale blue, when they heard voices in English echoing from empty valleys. One interviewed in the 1990s said they were not ghosts, they were soldiers made of light. Even now, fragments of declassified records suggest Unit 731B was testing something beyond psychological warfare involving quantum field resonance and synthetic apparitions. Scientists were exploring whether energy released at the moment of death could be measured, copied, and replicated. If that's true, the military hadn't just been studying ghosts, they'd been trying to create life after death. But somewhere in those experiments, they crossed a line they couldn't erase. The more they tried to control the apparitions, the more unpredictable they became. Lights flickered in sealed chambers. Instruments recorded spikes in electromagnetic activity when no equipment was running. And then, one night, every generator in the facility overloaded at once. The lights went out for 42 minutes. When they came back on, 3 scientists were missing. The security footage showed only one thing before the blackout blurred figures. Dozens of them, stepping out of the air. The military shut it all down the next morning. Unit 731B was erased from existence. But ghosts don't vanish on command. By the 1980s, strange electromagnetic readings began surfacing near former test sites, fields where soldiers once fought, deserts where projectors once hummed. Civilians started reporting the same apparitions soldiers had described decades earlier. Drivers saw glowing shapes crossing roads at night. Campers heard footsteps circling their tents. Photographers captured faint outlines in their flash. Every time, local authorities received anonymous calls urging them not to investigate. In one particularly chilling case, a journalist named Michael Dane uncovered fragments of Project Spectre's files while researching a book on Cold War experiments. Days after announcing his findings, his apartment was broken into, his notes, tapes, and hard drives all gone. He left the country soon after, claiming he'd been followed by men who didn't cast shadows. The pattern was unmistakable. Each generation tried to expose the truth. Each generation vanished into silence. And yet, one thing remained constant: the sightings. The same faces, the same glowing forms, appearing in new wars, new places. Iraq, Afghanistan, even military bases in the US reported unexplained anomalies. On surveillance, it was as if the ghosts had evolved, no longer bound to one place or time. But maybe that's because they were never ghosts in the first place. Some modern physicists believe the electromagnetic field used in Project Spectre may have created ripples in spacetime itself, echoes capable of replaying fragments of human presence over and over, feeding on memory, on fear, on observation. If that's true, then those soldiers who swore they saw their fallen brothers weren't seeing ghosts. They were seeing reality itself, looping, bleeding through. And maybe that's why the military buried it so deep. Because how do you fight an enemy that isn't alive or dead? But both. The files end abruptly. The sightings don't. Somewhere, in the classified depths of history, lies the final missing piece, the moment that military realized it couldn't contain what it had unleashed. That revelation would change everything, and in the final chapter, we open that last sealed folder, the one stamped in red ink, marked, "Do not release under any circumstances." The cover-up continues. It began again in silence always, silence first, as if the air itself was holding its breath. In 2003, deep inside Camp Victory in Iraq, a group of soldiers reported seeing strange lights flickering above the old palace walls at night. At first, they thought it was enemy surveillance drones, flares, maybe a trick of desert heat. But when the lights descended, forming what looked like human shapes drifting across the courtyard, the laughter stopped. One of the men raised his weapon. Another whispered, "Don't shoot. They're ours." The figures marched in slow formation, uniforms faintly visible, rifles slung over shoulders. Then, one by one, they dissolved into the sand. That incident never appeared in official reports. The soldiers were debriefed, separated, and ordered not to discuss what they'd seen. Within days, military contractors arrived, installed new surveillance systems, and restricted access to the courtyard. But the strange part, those cameras were never connected to the main network. By then, the pattern was familiar. Every time the apparitions reappeared in Iraq, Afghanistan, even inside training bases in the US, the government's response was identical: erase, deny, relocate. Files marked environmental interference replaced eyewitness statements. But every few years, a single detail slipped through the cracks: a thermal image showing figures without heat signatures, a radar anomaly shaped like marching soldiers, a radio frequency that whispered names of the dead. And behind every one of these incidents, the same classification code, Spectre. The same word that haunted reports from Normandy to Vietnam. For decades, the American military had sworn that Project Spectre was shut down, its files destroyed, its researchers gone. But an anonymous leak in 2009 told a different story. The documents, sent from an encrypted address to a group of investigative journalists, referenced a new initiative under the Department of Defense. Its name, Spectre Continuum. According to the leaked memo, its purpose was to monitor and contain recurring phenomena linked to historical field anomalies. In simpler terms, it was created to watch the ghosts the first project had made. If the documents are genuine, it means the military wasn't just covering up sightings, it was still studying them. Some of the attached reports were chilling. In 2007, surveillance footage from Bagram airfield captured faint outlines of men moving along a fence line during a sandstorm. The men were dressed in World War II fatigues, their weapons M1. When patrol units checked the perimeter, no one was there. But the storm carried something else: radio chatter on long-abandoned frequencies. Fragments of voices calling out coordinates that hadn't been used since the 1940s. The military blamed equipment malfunction, but the leak included an internal email chain between analysts, debating whether the incident matched a Spectre recurrence pattern. One line stood out: the phenomenon seems to reappear wherever human conflict overlaps old resonance zones. Old resonance zones, places soaked in death and memory. If that's true, then every modern battlefield is haunted, not by superstition, but by physics. The ghosts aren't spirits, they're echoes, replayed by the same invisible forces the military once tried to weaponize, and the soldiers who see them aren't crazy, they're witnesses to history bleeding through. But there's one more layer to this story. In 2012, a whistleblower from within the intelligence community known only as R came forward with a claim that shook those few who dared to believe. He said that Project Spectre had evolved into something far beyond containment. The government was now communicating with the apparitions. Using high-frequency arrays and quantum sensors, researchers allegedly detected structured responses from energy fields in old war zones, responses that mimicked human consciousness. In one experiment, they broadcasted Morse code messages into a former test site in Nevada. A reply came back, the same message, reversed. R claimed that after that transmission, the base went into lockdown. All communications ceased for 6 weeks. When it reopened, every one of the project's civilian contractors had been replaced. The official statement said it was due to budget realignment. Unconfirmed reports suggest otherwise. There were whispers that the reply contained coordinates, not to any location on Earth, but to a frequency, one that supposedly matched residual energy readings from the original Spectre experiments in the 1950s. Whatever answered them, wasn't human. Since then, veterans who served in those same areas have continued to report strange encounters, cold spots in desert heat, ghostly reflections in night vision goggles, and voices repeating their radio transmissions before they even speak. Some dismissed it as exhaustion, others knew better. One soldier wrote anonymously, "It's like they're trapped in the static. When you turn the radio off, they're still talking." The deeper the military buries the story, the louder it grows. Declassified documents from the early 2000s reveal multiple unexplained energy surges recorded during large-scale battle spikes, identical to those produced by early spectral field devices. Each time, the military scrambled to attribute them to weather, power grids, or atmospheric interference. Yet the energy readings always appeared in the same kind of place, near mass casualties. It's as if the field, the same invisible net that once caught the first ghost, reactivates in moments of death and chaos, feeding off trauma, memory, and electromagnetic bursts, and that's when the sightings return. Some scientists now believe the ghosts aren't haunting soldiers. The soldiers are reawakening, the ghosts reviving a system that's been running quietly beneath our world for 80 years. But there's one final mystery, the one that ties everything together. In 2019, a former data technician from a private defense contractor released what he claimed was an intercepted transmission from an underground facility in Maryland. The message was faint, filled with static, but one sentence was clear enough to chill anyone who heard it. "They're not gone. They're learning." After that leak, the technician vanished. His apartment was emptied, his bank accounts frozen. The story disappeared from the headlines within days. And yet, the last line of his report remains burned into the few surviving archives online. If Project Spectre was meant to manipulate perception, it succeeded. But if it was meant to contain what it created, it failed. Because whatever the military unleashed decades ago doesn't seem bound by time or command anymore. It follows battlefields like a shadow that never dies. Every war, every conflict, every place where soldiers fall, it returns, whispering through radios, shimmering through smoke, replaying the faces of the lost. And maybe that's the real secret. Maybe the ghosts never wanted to be hidden. Maybe they were the price for turning death into data, for trying to control the one force that refuses to obey. Somewhere, locked in a vault beneath the Pentagon, there's said to be a final feeler, single folder marked Spectre Terminal Report. Only one page inside, one sentence written by a general whose name has been blacked out. "Terminate all spectral field research immediately. We've seen them watching, and now they see us." The story ends there. The sightings don't add as long as soldiers keep walking into war. The echoes of the dead will keep walking beside them. Maybe the ghosts were never covered up at all. Maybe the cover-up was to hide that we created them.